She was leaving. Not in the dramatic way you see in movies. No screaming, no accusations, just a quiet withdrawal that had been happening for months. He felt it. The decreasing warmth, the shorter responses, the way she looked at him like he was furniture she'd stopped noticing. He did what most men do. He tried harder, complimented more, made himself more available, apologized for things he wasn't sure he'd done wrong. He became softer, more accommodating, more eager to please. And with every soft gesture, her respect dropped another degree. 6 months later, she was with someone else. A man who, by his assessment, gave her far less. Less attention, less accommodation, less apparent effort. A man who seemed almost cold in comparison. He couldn't understand it. He'd given everything. The other man seemed to give almost nothing. How did less become more? This video answers that question. What you're about to learn isn't about playing games. It isn't about manipulation or deception. It's about understanding a psychological truth that most men never grasp. Warmth without boundaries creates contempt. Availability without scarcity creates invisibility. Effort without calibration creates suffocation. The behaviors I'm going to teach you appear cold on the surface. But they're not cruel. They're not about withholding love or creating pain. They're about embodying the kind of presence that naturally generates respect. The kind women respond to not because they're taught to, but because something deeper recognizes it as strength. Schopenhauer understood this paradox. He wrote that the person who shows least need has the most power. Not because needlessness is inherently valuable, but because it signals something women's psychology is wired to recognize. A man who doesn't need her approval is a man who has other sources of worth, other options, other foundations. And that man is inherently more valuable than one whose entire worth depends on her validation. This isn't about becoming an emotionless machine. The men who try that become hollow. Women sense the performance and respect them even less. This is about becoming genuinely centered, about building an internal foundation so solid that her opinion, while valued, doesn't determine your worth, about carrying yourself in ways that communicate strength without aggression, confidence without arrogance, independence without coldness. Robert Greene studied powerful figures throughout history. Generals, kings, seducers. He found a pattern. The ones who commanded the deepest loyalty and respect were never the ones who pursued it most visibly. They created conditions where respect flowed toward them naturally, where following them felt like elevation rather than submission. That's what these 7 behaviors create. Let me give you the framework first. I call it the respect architecture. It has 3 pillars. Pillar 1, self-sovereignty. Your emotional state, your decisions, and your direction are governed internally, not by her reactions or preferences. Pillar 2, strategic reserve. You don't offer everything immediately. There's always something held back, something ungiven, something that creates forward pull rather than present saturation. Pillar 3, calibrated investment. Your effort matches what the relationship has earned, never exceeding it. You don't overpay for connection that hasn't proven its value. These pillars sound abstract now. By the end of this video, they'll be concrete. You'll see exactly how they manifest in specific behaviors. And you'll understand why women respect them at a level that goes far deeper than conscious thought. But first, I need to address something you might be feeling. You might be thinking, this sounds cold. This sounds like game playing. This sounds like becoming someone I'm not. I understand that resistance. I felt it too when I first encountered these principles. I'd been taught that love meant giving everything, that good partners were endlessly accommodating, that effort and availability were how you demonstrated value. What I learned, painfully, was that those beliefs created the opposite of what I intended. The more I gave, the less I received. The more available I became, the less I was valued. The more I demonstrated commitment, the less committed she became. The principles in this video reversed that pattern. Not by making me cruel, by making me centered. Not by making me cold, by making me calibrated. Machiavelli wrote that it is better to be feared than loved if you cannot be both. In relationships, this translates differently. It's better to be respected than liked if you cannot be both. Because respect can become love, but the reverse rarely happens. Once respect dies, love follows. No matter how much she likes you as a person, if she doesn't respect you as a man, attraction cannot survive. Here's what we'll cover. Behavior 1. The strategic stillness. How non-reactivity creates power. Behavior 2. The departure principle. Why walking away without explanation commands more respect than any conversation. Behavior 3. The validation void. How not seeking approval makes you magnetic. Behavior 4. The conflict neutrality. Why silence in disagreement speaks louder than any argument. Behavior 5. The boundary fortress. How setting limits without guilt transforms how she sees you. Behavior 6. The investment asymmetry. Why saying less and doing less often means more. Behavior 7. The emotional sovereignty. The master behavior that makes all others possible. Each behavior builds on the last. By the end, you won't just have tactics. You'll have a complete framework for generating respect that applies not just with women, but in every area of your life. Let's begin with the behavior that transforms everything else. The first cold behavior is one that most men have never practiced deliberately. The ability to remain completely still when everything inside you wants to react. I call this the strategic stillness, and it's the foundation of every other behavior in this video. Let me show you what this looks like. She says something provocative, something designed to get a response. Maybe she mentions another man who's been paying attention to her. Maybe she criticizes something about you. Maybe she withdraws affection suddenly without explanation. The warm man reacts immediately. His face changes. His energy shifts. He questions. He defends. He seeks reassurance. Every response telegraphs one thing. She has power over his emotional state. She can move him with words. He is not stable. The strategic stillness looks different. She says the provocative thing. You pause, not dramatically, just naturally. Your face remains neutral. Your body doesn't tense or shift. You take in what she said as information rather than as attack. Then, after a moment that feels longer to her than to you, you respond. Or you don't. Sometimes, the most powerful response is no response at all. Just a slight nod. Maybe a calm change of subject. The message transmitted is, that didn't land the way you expected. I'm not moved by provocation. Jung identified what he called the complex, clusters of emotional energy that, when triggered, hijack our behavior. We react automatically, often in ways we later regret. The person who can observe their complexes without being controlled by them has achieved something rare. The strategic stillness is this observational capacity made visible. You feel the trigger, you notice the impulse to react, but you don't follow the impulse. You let it exist without expression. Why does this generate respect? Because it signals mastery. It tells her that you are not governed by your emotions, that external events don't determine your internal state. that you have achieved something most people never achieve: sovereignty over your own reactions. Women are drawn to this because it represents safety, not safety in the soft sense, safety in the structural sense. A man who can govern himself can be trusted in chaos. A man who's thrown by every emotional wind cannot. Machiavelli observed that the prince who appears unshakable in crisis commands more loyalty than one who scrambles in response. The appearance of calm during storm is itself a form of power. It suggests reserves, depth, capacity that hasn't been revealed because it hasn't been required. Let me give you specific application. Scenario 1. She's upset about something you did. She raises her voice. She uses words designed to wound. The reactive man matches her energy. He defends, he counterattacks, he escalates until both are saying things they'll regret. The strategic stillness. You let her speak. You don't interrupt. You don't defend while she's still attacking. When she finishes, you pause. You let silence exist for 3 full seconds. Then you speak at half her volume, half her speed. I hear that you're upset. Let's talk about this when we can both think clearly. Then you don't engage further until the temperature drops. What happens? She's disarmed. Her escalation had nowhere to land. Your stillness didn't give her the reaction she was seeking. And in the absence of that reaction, something shifts. She may still be upset, but underneath the upset, respect has increased. Scenario 2. She mentions casually that a coworker has been flirting with her. The reactive man immediately interrogates. Who? How? What did you say? His anxiety is visible. His fear of loss is transparent. The strategic stillness. You nod slightly. Sounds like he has good taste. Then you change the subject. Your face shows nothing. Your voice shows nothing. You've communicated, I'm not threatened by competition because I'm not in competition. I know my value. This information doesn't destabilize me. What happens? She was likely testing, consciously or not. Testing to see if you'd crumble. Testing to see if your confidence was real or performed. Your stillness passed the test. Your non-reaction communicated something her subconscious was seeking to verify. He's secure. He doesn't need to control me or my environment to feel okay. Now here's the deeper layer. The strategic stillness isn't suppression. Suppression is pretending you don't feel. That's exhausting and ultimately visible. Women sense suppressed emotion. It reads as tension, as inauthenticity, as something hidden. Stillness is different. It's feeling fully while choosing response. It's the space between stimulus and reaction that Marcus Aurelius wrote about. The space where freedom lives. Here's how you develop it. Practice physical stillness. When you feel triggered, notice where your body wants to move. Your hands want to gesture. Your face wants to change. Your posture wants to shift. Don't let it. Hold position. Let the impulse exist without expression. Practice verbal stillness. When you want to speak immediately, pause. Count 3 seconds internally. Let silence exist. This pause alone changes the energy of every conversation. Practice mental stillness. When thoughts race toward reaction, observe them rather than following them. Notice the thought. She's trying to manipulate me. Don't act on it. Just observe. The observation itself creates distance. Freud identified the ego as the mediator between impulse and action. The strategic stillness is strong ego function made visible. It shows her that you have a governing center, that something in you decides what emerges and what doesn't. That governance is what creates respect, and it's the foundation for everything that follows. The second cold behavior is one most men are terrified to practice: the willingness to leave without explaining why. I call this the departure principle, and it may be the most powerful behavior in this entire video. Here's what most men do when a relationship becomes problematic. They talk, they explain, they try to communicate their way to resolution. They believe that if they just find the right words, she'll understand. And if she understands, everything will be fixed. Sometimes this works. Often it doesn't. And when it doesn't, their continued presence despite the problem communicates something devastating. I'll accept treatment I do not like because I'm afraid to lose you. That message destroys respect faster than almost anything else. The departure principle is the opposite. When something is unacceptable, you don't explain endlessly. You don't negotiate. You leave. Maybe the room. Maybe the conversation. In extreme cases, maybe the relationship itself. Not dramatically. Not with slammed doors or angry words. Quietly. Completely. Without the explanation she expects. Machiavelli understood that withdrawal of presence is more powerful than any words. The prince who removes himself becomes a question that demands answering. The one who stays and argues becomes furniture to be worked around. Here's why this generates respect. When you leave without explaining, you communicate several things simultaneously. 1. I have standards that exist independent of you. 2. Crossing those standards has consequences. 3. I'm not going to exhaust myself trying to make you understand. 4. My continued presence is earned, not guaranteed. Each of these messages increases respect. Not because she likes them, she probably doesn't, but because they signal a man who governs himself by internal standards rather than by her preferences. Robert Greene wrote about the power of absence, how withdrawing attention creates vacuum, how people value what might be lost more than what's permanently available. The departure principle applies this insight practically. Let me give you specific application. She's repeatedly dismissive of something that matters to you. You've mentioned it before. Nothing changed. The weak response. Bringing it up again. Explaining again. Hoping this time she'll hear. The departure principle. The next time it happens, you don't address it verbally. You simply disengage. You become busy. You leave early. You create distance without announcing why. She'll notice. She'll ask what's wrong. And here's the critical part. You don't fully explain. You say, I needed some space. You let her fill in the gaps. You let her wonder. You let the absence speak. What happens? She has to confront the fact that her behavior had consequence. Not through your words, which she could argue against. Through your absence, which she can only feel. Now let's connect this to the third behavior. The validation void. Most men leak neediness constantly. They seek validation in ways so subtle they don't even notice. The look after telling a story to see if she's impressed. The check-in after making a decision to see if she approves. The frequent I love yous that are really questions. Do you still love me? The validation void is the deliberate elimination of this seeking behavior. Schopenhauer wrote that the person who seems to need nothing receives everything. Not because the universe rewards detachment, but because needlessness is inherently attractive. It suggests abundance. It suggests that your worth is established through sources she doesn't control. Here's what the validation void looks like. You tell a story. You don't scan her face afterward to gauge her reaction. You told it because you wanted to, not because you needed her impressed. You make a decision. You don't immediately justify it or seek her approval. You decided. The decision stands. You give affection, not to get affection back, not to prompt reciprocation, because you felt like giving it. The gift is complete in itself. Each of these small shifts communicates the same thing. My sense of value doesn't depend on your response. I'm not seeking your validation because I don't need it. This creates a specific psychological effect that Jung identified. When validation is readily available, it's devalued. When it becomes scarce, it becomes precious. The validation void makes your approval rare, and rare approval is approval worth earning. Let me give you the failure mode. He compliments her frequently, multiple times per day. Each compliment seeks a response. Thanks isn't enough. He wants enthusiasm. He wants reciprocation. She begins to feel pressured. His compliments feel like requests wrapped in nice words. She gives less in response because she feels drained by his seeking. His validation seeking has created validation avoidance. Now watch the alternative. He compliments rarely. When he does, it's specific and genuine. There's no scan for response afterward. He says it and moves on. The compliment was complete in itself. She notices. His rare approval has weight. His frequent approval never could. When he does compliment, she feels it. Because it's not currency he's spending constantly. It's recognition he gives occasionally. The combination of the departure principle and the validation void creates something powerful. You don't stay when conditions are unacceptable. You don't seek approval for your decisions or your presence. You operate from internal standards that you're willing to enforce through withdrawal. This combination makes you rare. Most men stay too long and seek too much. Most men treat their presence as freely given and their approval as constantly available. You're different. Your presence must be earned. Your approval must be warranted. And that difference changes how every interaction feels. Nietzsche wrote about the value of scarcity. How gold is precious because it's rare, not because it's useful. Your presence and approval become gold when you stop treating them as infinite resources. That's the power of cold behavior 2 and 3. The fourth cold behavior transforms how conflict operates in your relationships. The ability to remain neutral when she wants you to fight. I call this the conflict neutrality. And it's counterintuitive because everything in your conditioning tells you to engage. When she's upset, you want to fix it. When she attacks, you want to defend. When she creates conflict, you want to resolve it. These impulses feel natural. They feel like caring. But they often backfire. And here's why. When you engage with every conflict, you signal that she controls when conflict happens. Her mood determines your involvement. Her emotional state sets the agenda. You become reactive rather than selective. The conflict neutrality is different. It's the recognition that not every conflict deserves your energy. Not every upset requires your engagement. Not every attack warrants your defense. Epictetus taught that we suffer not from events, but from our judgments about events. The conflict neutrality applies this insight. You observe the conflict. You assess whether engagement serves you. And often, you choose not to engage. Here's what this looks like. She's upset about something minor. Maybe you didn't respond to a text quickly enough. Maybe you forgot something trivial. She's making it bigger than it is. The engaged response: apologizing, explaining, defending, getting drawn into her frame. The conflict neutrality. You listen briefly. You acknowledge her feeling without accepting her frame. I understand you're upset. Then you don't engage further. You don't apologize for something that doesn't warrant apology. You don't defend against accusations that don't deserve defense. What happens? She has two options. She can continue escalating without your participation, which feels foolish. Or she can drop it, which is what usually happens. Your non-engagement communicates, "This isn't worth my energy." That assessment often becomes hers. Machiavelli wrote about choosing one's battles. The prince who fights every conflict exhausts his resources and appears weak. The prince who fights only when victory matters appears strong even in non-engagement. Now, let's connect this to the fifth behavior, the boundary fortress. Most men set boundaries weakly. They state them once, then collapse when tested. Or they set them with guilt, apologizing even as they establish limits. Or they set them aggressively, creating conflict where none was needed. The boundary fortress is something different. It's the establishment of clear limits with complete calm. No aggression, no apology, just fact. Here's what this looks like. She wants something from you that you don't want to give. Maybe it's your time. Maybe it's an activity. Maybe it's access to parts of your life. The weak response: giving in despite not wanting to. Building resentment. The aggressive response: refusing angrily, creating conflict. The boundary fortress: no, delivered without temperature. No explanation offered. No justification provided. If she presses, you repeat, "I said no." Still calm. Still neutral. Jung wrote about the persona we present to the world versus the self beneath. Men often wear personas of agreeableness that don't reflect their actual desires. The boundary fortress removes the agreeable persona. It shows the actual self, including the parts that refuse. Here's why boundaries without guilt are so powerful. When you set a boundary with apology, you undermine it. The apology says, "I know this is wrong, but I'm doing it anyway." That invites challenge. That suggests you can be convinced. When you set a boundary with aggression, you create resistance. The aggression says, "I'm threatened by your request." That suggests the boundary is defensive rather than natural. When you set a boundary with calm certainty, you communicate something else entirely. This is simply what I want. No drama attached. No negotiation invited. Just fact. Let me give you specific language. She asks, "Why won't you come to this event with me?" Weak. "I'm sorry. I just really don't want to." "I know you'll be disappointed." Aggressive. "Because I don't want to. Okay? Stop pressuring me." Boundary fortress. "Because I've decided not to. I hope you enjoy it." Notice what's missing. No apology. No aggression. No extensive explanation. Just simple statement of choice. What happens? She may push once. If you hold, she'll usually accept. Because your calm certainty suggests that pushing is futile. There's nothing to argue against. There's no guilt to leverage. There's no aggression to fight. There's just a man who knows what he wants and isn't confused about it. Marcus Aurelius wrote about the inner citadel. The place within that cannot be penetrated by external events. The boundary fortress is the inner citadel made visible. It shows her that there are limits, that your accommodation has edges, that you cannot be endlessly pushed. This generates respect because it signals self-knowledge. Most men don't know what they actually want. They say yes when they mean no. They accommodate when they want to refuse. They lose themselves trying to please. You're different. You know your limits. You communicate them clearly. And you do so without the emotional charge that invites challenge. Here's the integration between conflict neutrality and boundary fortress. When she creates conflict about your boundaries, you don't engage. You state the boundary with calm. If she escalates, you don't match. You hold position without fighting. You combine non-engagement with firm limits. This combination is devastating in the best sense. She can't create conflict because you won't participate. She can't override your limits because you won't bend. She has to accept you as you are, not as she wants you to be. And that acceptance, forced by your consistency, becomes respect. Because respect always flows toward those who cannot be easily moved. The sixth cold behavior addresses something most men get completely wrong: the relationship between effort and respect. I call this the investment asymmetry, and it contradicts everything you've been taught about how to treat women well. Here's the conventional wisdom: show her you care by doing more. Plan elaborate dates. Send thoughtful texts. Remember every detail. Invest heavily to demonstrate your commitment. Here's what actually happens when you follow this wisdom. She starts to take your effort for granted. What was once special becomes expected. And the more you give, the less each gift means. This isn't about women being ungrateful. It's about human psychology. We value what's scarce. We devalue what's abundant. Your constant high investment makes your effort abundant, and abundant effort loses its ability to impress. Robert Greene identified this pattern in his study of historical power dynamics. The person who gives freely loses leverage. The person who gives strategically gains it. Not because giving is wrong, but because how you give determines how it's received. The investment asymmetry means your effort should slightly lag the relationship's progress. Not dramatically. Not in ways that create insecurity. Just enough that your investment feels earned rather than automatic. Let me make this concrete. Early dating. Most men overinvest immediately. Long texts, frequent contact, elaborate planning. Their investment level assumes commitment that hasn't been established. The investment asymmetry. Your investment matches what the relationship has proven. Early stages get moderate investment. As she demonstrates genuine interest and reciprocation, your investment increases proportionally. Established relationship. Most men fall into patterns. They maintain consistent high investment regardless of what's happening. Their effort becomes background noise, no longer noticed. The investment asymmetry. Your investment responds to the relationship's temperature. When things are good, you invest. When effort isn't reciprocated, you calibrate downward. This isn't punishment. It's calibration. Schopenhauer wrote about the pendulum of desire, how we swing between wanting and boredom. When we have something fully, we stop wanting it. The investment asymmetry keeps the pendulum from settling. It maintains just enough uncertainty to keep desire alive. Here's specific application. You've been doing most of the planning for dates. You initiate most conversations. Your investment significantly exceeds hers. The weak response, continuing this pattern while feeling resentful. The aggressive response, confronting her about the imbalance. The investment asymmetry. Without announcement, you scale back. You stop initiating every conversation. You stop planning every date. You create space for her to invest. What happens? One of two things. Either she steps into the space and starts investing more, which was the goal, or she doesn't, which tells you something important about her actual interest level. Either outcome is valuable information. Now here's the deeper principle. Your investment should always leave room for her investment. If you're doing everything, she has nothing to do. If you're giving everything, she has nothing to give. Overinvestment doesn't just reduce your value. It reduces her opportunity to invest in you. Women want to invest in men they respect. They want to give to relationships that matter. When you monopolize the giving, you rob her of this opportunity. She becomes a passive recipient rather than an active participant. Machiavelli understood that people value what they've paid for more than what they've received freely. When she invests in you, she values you more. When she works for your attention means more. Your underinvestment creates space for her investment, and her investment increases her valuation of you. Let me give you the calibration framework. Track reciprocity. For every unit of effort you give, How much comes back? Not as accounting, as awareness. If reciprocity is high, maintain or slightly increase investment. If reciprocity is declining, reduce investment proportionally. If reciprocity is very low, reduce investment significantly and observe. This isn't game playing, it's self-respect, expressed through behavior. You don't pour energy into systems that don't return it. You don't overinvest in relationships that under-respond. Freud wrote about libido as finite energy that must be directed wisely. The investment asymmetry is wise direction. You don't exhaust yourself giving to someone who doesn't receive. You don't empty your reserves for someone who doesn't notice. Here's the transformation story. A man came to me exhausted. He'd been dating a woman for 4 months. He planned every date. He initiated every conversation. He sent good morning texts, good night texts, thinking of you texts throughout the day. She'd become increasingly distant. Responses got shorter. Interest seemed to wane. He was considering doubling down, planning something even more elaborate to recapture her attention. I told him, do the opposite. Stop initiating. Stop planning. Create space. He was terrified. He was certain she'd disappear if he stopped pursuing. What happened? She noticed within 2 days. She reached out. She asked if everything was okay. When he didn't provide the usual reassurance, she started pursuing. She planned their next date. She sent the texts he'd been sending. His reduced investment made her realize what she'd been taking for granted. His absence made his presence valuable. His restraint accomplished what his excess never could. That's the investment asymmetry in action. One more principle. Investment should be responsive to temperature, not desperate to change it. If she's pulling away, your investment should pull back in parallel. Not to manipulate. Because over-investing in someone who's withdrawing is disrespecting yourself. You're saying, your lack of interest doesn't affect my behavior. That's not strength. That's absence of self-regard. When investment matches reality, respect follows. Because you've shown you value yourself enough to calibrate. You're not a machine that outputs effort regardless of input. You're a man who responds to how he's treated. The 7th cold behavior is the master behavior. Every other behavior we've discussed flows from this one. I call it the emotional sovereignty. And it's about one thing: governing your own internal state regardless of external circumstances. Jung spent his career studying what he called individuation, the process of becoming fully yourself, of integrating all parts of your psyche into a coherent whole. The individuated person isn't controlled by unconscious forces. They're aware of them. They have choice. The emotional sovereignty is individuation applied to relationships. Your mood is yours. Your state is yours. Her behavior influences you, but it doesn't determine you. You feel her impact without being capsized by it. Most men have no sovereignty. Their state depends entirely on her. If she's happy, they're happy. If she's upset, they're anxious. If she's distant, they're desperate. They're boats tossed by her emotional weather. The emotionally sovereign man is different. He feels the weather. He's not immune to it. But he has ballast, depth, stability that exists independent of conditions. Here's what this looks like. She's in a bad mood. Nothing you did. Just her day, her stress, her internal process. The dependent man becomes anxious. What did I do? How can I fix it? His energy mirrors hers. His state becomes hostage to hers. The emotionally sovereign man acknowledges her state without joining it. Seems like you're having a rough day. He doesn't try to fix it. He doesn't absorb it. He remains steady while allowing her to experience what she's experiencing. What happens? She may initially want him to join her in the darkness. When he doesn't, something shifts. His stability becomes attractive. His groundedness becomes something she can lean against. His refusal to sink becomes the dock she can eventually tie to. Nietzsche wrote about becoming who you are, the process of self-creation through discipline and awareness. The emotionally sovereign man has created himself. His identity isn't borrowed from her validation or destabilized by her disapproval. Here's specific application. She's cold after an argument. She's giving short responses, minimal eye contact. Most men escalate their seeking. They apologize more. They pursue harder. They try to fix the coldness. The emotionally sovereign man does something different. He matches her energy without becoming affected by it. He remains calm. He goes about his day. He doesn't chase warmth that's being withheld. This isn't punishment. This is self-governance. He's not going to bend himself into shapes trying to restore conditions she's controlling. He's not going to sacrifice his stability for her approval. And here's what typically happens. Her coldness loses power. It's not producing the effect she expected, consciously or not. His stability outlasts her withdrawal. Eventually, she returns to warmth because her coldness isn't accomplishing anything. Marcus Aurelius wrote daily meditations on exactly this: how to remain undisturbed by external events, how to recognize that others' behavior reflects them, not you, how to maintain the inner citadel regardless of outer chaos. The emotionally sovereign man has this citadel. He retreats there when needed. He governs himself from its center. And women sense this depth. They feel the stability. They respect the unshakable core. Now, here's where it connects to everything else. The strategic stillness requires emotional sovereignty to maintain. You can't remain still if her provocations move you. The departure principle requires emotional sovereignty to execute. You can't leave without explaining if you're desperate for her understanding. The validation void requires emotional sovereignty to sustain. You can't stop seeking approval if your worth depends on receiving it. The conflict neutrality requires emotional sovereignty to practice. You can't remain neutral if her conflicts hijack your state. The boundary fortress requires emotional sovereignty to build. You can't hold boundaries if her displeasure crumbles you. The investment asymmetry requires emotional sovereignty to calibrate. You can't reduce investment if you're terrified of her response. Everything flows from sovereignty. So how do you build it? First, develop internal sources of worth. Achievements that matter to you. Skills you're proud of. A life that would be worth living even without her. Second, practice state regulation. When emotions rise, observe them without acting. Feel the feeling without becoming the feeling. Create space between stimulus and response. Third, build tolerance for discomfort. Sit with her disappointment without rushing to fix it. Tolerate her withdrawal without collapsing into pursuit. Get comfortable with uncomfortable states. Fourth, maintain perspective. She's one person. This is one relationship. Your entire worth doesn't ride on her opinion. Remember this when emotions try to convince you otherwise. Schopenhauer wrote that the greatest wisdom is knowing oneself. The emotionally sovereign man knows himself. He knows his triggers. He knows his weaknesses. He knows where his stability comes from and how to access it. This self-knowledge creates an aura that women sense immediately. Not arrogance, not coldness, groundedness. The quality of a man who has done internal work, who has confronted his demons, who has built a foundation that doesn't shake. Here's the transformation element. Every man I've worked with who developed emotional sovereignty reported the same shift. Women treated them differently, not because they were playing games, because their energy had changed. Their stability was visible. Their groundedness was palpable. One man described it like this: "She used to be able to ruin my whole day with a look. Now she can have a bad day, and I can be compassionate without drowning." That's sovereignty. And that sovereignty is what generates the deepest respect. Because the man who governs himself doesn't need to be governed by her. The man who's stable in himself can be stable for her. The man who's not dependent on her approval is the man whose approval becomes worth earning. That's the master behavior, and it makes all the others possible. Let me bring everything together now. You've just learned 7 cold behaviors that generate respect from women. Not through cruelty, not through manipulation, through embodying the kind of presence that women's psychology is wired to recognize as strength. The strategic stillness. Remaining unmoved when she expects reaction. The departure principle. Walking away without explanation when conditions warrant. The validation. Void. Eliminating the constant seeking of her approval. The conflict neutrality. Refusing to engage with conflicts that don't deserve your energy. The boundary fortress. Setting limits with calm certainty. The investment asymmetry. Calibrating your effort to match what the relationship has earned. The emotional sovereignty. Governing your internal state, regardless of external circumstances. These behaviors work together as a system. Each one reinforces the others. Together, they create what I call the respect architecture, a structure of behavior that naturally generates the respect you want. But I need to tell you something important about how to implement this. These behaviors cannot be performed. They must be embodied. If you try to fake stillness while seething inside, she'll sense the incongruity. If you try to fake sovereignty while desperately seeking her approval, your body will betray you. Women are extraordinarily attuned to incongruence. They feel the gap between performed behavior and actual state. This means the real work is internal. You have to actually become less reactive, not just appear less reactive. You have to actually detach from validation seeking, not just hide it better. You have to actually develop sovereignty, not just perform stability. Jung wrote about the shadow, the parts of ourselves we've rejected and hidden. Most men have shadows full of neediness, insecurity, and fear of loss. These shadows leak through performances. They undermine the behaviors you're trying to embody. The real transformation isn't behavioral, it's psychological. You have to face the parts of yourself that are desperate for approval. Accept them. Integrate them. Then you can genuinely move beyond them. Here's the framework for integration. First, acknowledge your current patterns. Where do you seek validation? Where do you lose sovereignty? Where does your stillness break? Honest inventory is the starting point. Second, understand the origins. These patterns usually formed in childhood. They were adaptive then. They're maladaptive now. Understanding their source helps dissolve their grip. Third, practice deliberately. Each behavior requires practice in low-stakes situations before it becomes natural in high-stakes ones. Start small. Build capacity. Fourth, expect setbacks. You will lose stillness sometimes. You will seek validation sometimes. You will collapse boundaries sometimes. The goal isn't perfection, it's trajectory. Getting better over time. Fifth, celebrate progress. Notice when you maintain sovereignty where you would have lost it before. Notice when you hold a boundary you would have collapsed. This noticing reinforces the new patterns. Machiavelli wrote that fortune favors the prepared mind. The prepared mind is one that has practiced, that has failed and learned, that has built capacity through repetition. Now, let me return to where we began. The man whose partner left him for someone who seemed to give less. He couldn't understand it because he was measuring the wrong things. He measured effort. The other man measured impact. He measured availability. The other man measured value. He measured accommodation. The other man measured respect. The other man wasn't giving less. He was giving differently. He gave presence that felt stable, attention that felt earned, approval that felt rare, boundaries that felt real. Each of these created more respect than endless effort ever could. The transformation available to you isn't about becoming cold. It's about becoming centered, not about withholding love, about offering love from strength rather than from need. Not about playing games, about understanding the psychological dynamics that govern respect. Robert Greene wrote that the person who understands human nature has an advantage that transcends any single relationship. These 7 behaviors are applications of deep understanding. They work because they align with how psychology actually functions, not how we wish it functioned. Here's my challenge to you. Don't try to implement all 7 behaviors at once. That's overwhelming and leads to failure. Choose one, the one that feels most needed in your life right now. Practice it for 2 weeks. Notice what changes. Then add another. Build the architecture piece by piece. Let each behavior become natural before adding the next. Within 3 months, you'll be different. Not performing cold behaviors, actually embodying the kind of presence that generates respect automatically. And that embodiment is what separates men who understand these principles from men who live them. This is the shadow mind. You came here wondering why women respect certain men and not others. You're leaving with a framework that explains the difference and a path to becoming the man who naturally commands respect. But knowledge isn't transformation. Reading isn't becoming. The gap between understanding and embodying is where most men fail. The next video goes deeper, into the psychology of feminine respect itself. Why women test, what they're actually evaluating, how to pass tests you don't even see coming. If you're new here, you've just experienced what this channel offers. Not surface advice, not generic tips. Deep psychological principles that actually change how you move through the world. The subscribe button is there. Most viewers won't click it. They'll watch, nod, and scroll to the next video. They'll feel inspired for a moment, then forget. The men who build different lives are the ones who commit to different patterns, who return to content that challenges them, who put in the work between videos. Which one are you? Stay sharp. Stay aware. I'll see you in the next one.